Okay, so day two, you survived me lecturing at you for an entire class. The good news is I will only do that for half this class, and then we will be actually working together on an exercise to dive in right into day-to-day operations as a full stack developer. But one of the things I like to do is run class as I work as a developer. So we will be getting into project management a little bit later, but one of the things that we do in project management, especially when we're running an agile team, is a daily stand up, right? So we talk about, hey, what did you do yesterday? What did you get done? What did you think you were going to get done and didn't get done? What are you doing today? And do you have any roadblocks, right? And those are the three questions. You can do those reports asynchronously. My company does them all in Slack, and we have a chat bot that just asks us those questions and posts up the responses. But I like to kick off every class with, hey, what did we learn yesterday? And are there any things that we need to recover there or just touch base back with? What's the plan for today, right? Let's go through an outline, make sure everyone understands what we're supposed to be learning. And then let's open it up and say, maybe instead of roadblock, say, hey, here's something I saw in the news that I'm curious about, or just opening it up for general discussion, just kind of get the collaboration juices flowing, if that makes sense. So, with that said, what did we learn yesterday? And feel free to either unmute if you're virtual and throw something out, or if you're in the classroom, just shout out, what did we do yesterday?
We learned, I'm sorry, is somebody else speaking?
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. We learned about like different languages and coding and, framework and things like that. Different developer tools. We learned how to use Slack.
Awesome, thank you. Anyone else? What else did we cover yesterday? I know it was kind of intro day, so there was a lot going on there, but we covered a lot of different things. What else did we cover yesterday?
Expectations of the program, what to
Yep.
expect class and for the 24 weeks, how to get help, where we can reach out for help, and how to follow along with the assignments, how things will be labeled and things like that.
Awesome. Yep, absolutely. The labeling system super important. Looks crazy, and I know it looks OCD, but the goal is to make it easier to find those resources throughout the whole program. Absolutely. What did you guys think about the homework assignments or about Canvas? Easy enough to get around. Homework assignments make sense. All of that kind of stuff. Make sure you're understanding the rubric system. Do not panic when you see your grade in the class is a 66%, because the 66% is meeting expectations, right? So don't want you to think that a 66 is a C grade and you're not doing well. If you've got a 66 average, you're actually doing very well in the program. So don't worry about any of that. Anything else that we covered yesterday that's worth mentioning just for a recap?
The tech stack.
The tech stack. Yep. Tech stack, super important. Being able to understand that there are, 60 things on that list, but we're going to be focusing in down on about 10 of them that we'll cover. And based off of those 10, you'll be able to kind of plug and play there, right? And say, oh, well, this employer uses PHP. I learned JavaScript, but because I know JavaScript, I learned all of the concepts that are also in PHP, and I can go apply them. So yep, definitely important to mention the tech stack. And in fact, we're going to just review that diagram from yesterday based off of a couple of you submitted the daily feedback form requesting that we go back over that. So I'm just going to spend a couple minutes kind of going over that, making sure we've got that all good to go, and then we'll move on. Any other questions or any other topics before I dive into that?
No.
Awesome. Okay, so let me go ahead and share my screen. Get this size right so you can actually see it. Okay, so tech stack, again, super important to understand this because you need to know what you're learning before you understand, how to actually apply those concepts, right? So in our tech stack, we've got front end and back end, right? And anything on the front end is user experience. That's where the user is actually interacting with your app. And then the back end can be considered any of the data side, the communication side. That's all about what's happening behind the scenes or under the hood. In our front end, all of our code for web applications runs in the web browser. And that web browser is responsible for our three major web programming languages. HTML, hypertext markup language, that is going to be all of the content of what you see. CSS, cascading style sheets, that is going to style all of the content that we see. And then JavaScript, right? That JavaScript is going to make our web app interactive and make it so, well, what happens when they click on a button, or what happens when we need to pull some data in and show that data. And then finally, React, which is in the front end. It's a framework that utilizes HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in order to make our applications a little bit easier to render live data or to switch out screens or anything like that. We won't be getting into React until almost the second half of the curriculum, right around the midway point. But React is definitely something that runs in the front end. So then we've got the back end, right? And the back end is kind of split into two. We've got our API server, and our API server is what we're going to be learning is built in Node.js. And then we use a framework called Express, which makes Node just a little bit easier to develop APIs with. And that talks to our database server. And our database server is using this language called SQL. And SQL is a standard across any relational database. We'll actually be using a database called Postgres, Postgres, but we'll get into that later. But basically, the front end can never talk to the database server directly. There are all kinds of security concerns if the web browser can go interact with the database directly. And in fact, when I was starting to learn how to program, I was taking community college courses, and one of them was in SQL. And I thought, great, I'm going to learn all of this database stuff. And then I went out and I learned all about how to build a front end. And I happened to do it in a mobile app. And I learned all of this of how to build a mobile app. And then I went, great, now I want to combine these two classes together, and I want to take all the knowledge of working with a database and saving information with all the knowledge about how to build a front end, and I just couldn't do it. And I couldn't find any instruction and was so frustrated because I'm like, I've got these two pieces of knowledge. I know they've got to connect somewhere. And that missing piece was that API server, right? And that API server is going to send data to and from the front end using JSON, which we will be getting into. So no need to panic if you don't understand any of the languages on here. That is completely fine. Hopefully you recognize some of them from the prep work getting into the class, some of that HTML, some of that CSS. And we will be getting into that starting next week. But super important to understand kind of where all of this information sits. And we'll be building a chat app that by the time you get to the end of the curriculum, you will be sick of. And this chat app we make at first using just HTML and CSS. And it doesn't send messages anywhere. It just looks like a pretty chat script. Then we go in there and we make it interactive. We use JavaScript and make it so messages can actually be typed in and sent. From there, we then layer in our API. And we say, hey, wouldn't it be great if you could send these messages up to a server, and that server could take care of storing the messages for us. Then we layer in another version of this chat app, and we start adding in SQL, and we get our data saving into the database and pulling that information out so that when we reboot our server, all of that information is still saved. And then we do one final version of this chat app, and we use what's called an object relational mapper. And that's actually this little connection in here. And ORM just makes it easier to write our SQL queries kind of using JavaScript directly. So we don't need to be interacting with SQL in the raw kind of. We get to pull that data together. So hopefully this, we're not expecting you to be able to like just pick up one of these and start going with it. We've got obviously a whole 24-week curriculum to teach you everything on this chart. But I'm going to take a moment to breathe and see if anyone has any questions on this.
I had a quick question. I know, we're obviously not expected to like memorize this and everything. It's only day 2, but um, can you, so just to make sure I've got it right. So the front end never really communicates with the database directly. It's got to kind of go through the API,
You got
right?
it. Yep.
Okay. And then is it JSON? Is that a developer tool? Like what is that? What is that?
Great question. JSON is is a standard, right? It stands for JavaScript Object Notation, and it's basically just saying, hey, we're sending some data from the API, and that data is coming into the front end. But the front end kind of needs to understand what format that data is in, right? So when we think about data formats outside of the developer world, an Excel sheet is going to be very different than a Word document, right? We know a Word document is going to have rich text formatting, and it's going to, have headers and titles and paragraphs, and it's going to be kind of more long form content, right? But when we think about Excel or Google Sheets or whatever spreadsheet program you use, all that data is going to be in a table, and we're going to have formulas in that table, and the table is probably going to have some numbers and some data types and all of that kind of stuff. So the same goes for JSON. There are different ways of sending information between your API, both to and from it. But JSON in the past decade or so has become the dominant standard. No matter what programming language you're using on the back end, almost every programming language, especially whenever you're working with an API, is set up to understand, or what we call technically parse the data that the front end is sending and be able to break it apart into pieces that we understand. So that tends to be key value pairs, but we have an entire week dedicated to this one section in the middle. And so Ryan Goss is going to come in. He is a senior developer at Density downtown, and has taught in both cohorts. What he's going to do is work with the New York Times bestseller API, and you guys are going to be able to interact with an API, actually understand what data you're requesting, what data is coming back, and be able to show all of that data on a web page. And that's something that in the past 10 years of web development has become even more important, right? The ability for your application to talk to another application. And so that's the concept of an API, but under the hood, the data format that the API is sending and receiving data from is using JSON for a data format. Did that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. And you guys are going to love to hate JSON, because JSON is very, very flexible and very, very particular. So we will be actually working on a project that Free Code Camp used to have on their website called the Jukebox. And the basic idea there is like, hey, here's all of this data in a very specific format. How do I kind of nest down in there and get that one particular thing that I'm trying to access? And so we'll be doing that in the Intro to JavaScript weeks, which I believe are maybe around week 7. But if you're curious as to where we are headed, inside of Canvas, there is a syllabus that kind of lists everything out here. We will be updating this with more details as to what we're covering on each of those days. And I'll actually start layering in the outlines here, so you've got an idea of what we're covering. But you can also always go to the homepage and pop into this schedule and YouTube links, and have an idea of what's kind of coming up next at the top of this and what dates we'll be covering that. Any other questions from yesterday's class? Anything that you didn't get? And as a reminder, if you didn't get it, chances are there was another student who didn't get it. So this is your time to ask questions before we move on to new concepts. Okie doke. So I am going to move on to our day 2 outline. So already did a review of yesterday's review diagram. And by the way, I did update yesterday's outline with both the YouTube link and the transcript. So you'll be able to access these recorded classes hopefully by noon the following day. They take a little while to process on YouTube, but they should be accessible. Let me blow this up a little bit too. Okay, so quick reminder that there is a link in both Canvas and right here on this outline to vote for a time for office hours. Vote for all the time slots that you are available. You don't have to just pick the one that works best for you. You can put in whichever ones work best and select multiples, and then democracy, whatever time slot has the most votes, that's when we'll do office hours. Office hours are completely virtual, so you for every week, so you don't have to come into Common Space. And it is just an hour for you to prove that you're crazy and want to hear me talk for another hour. So any questions that you have, any topics that you want to go completely, tangent on, even if they're not related directly to the curriculum, it is basically an open door policy. Everyone joins in via Zoom. They are optional, so you don't have to show up to them. And they will be recorded and posted on YouTube, just like all of our other content. But it's really just an opportunity to ask questions about the homework or go over a concept that you didn't understand or anything like that. So please fill out office hours. By tomorrow's class, I will take whatever time has the most votes. And so by tomorrow at 5:30, 6 o'clock-ish, I'll let you know what the final office hours slot time is. Shameless plug, subscribe to our YouTube channel. I linked to it there. All of our classes are showing up there. Even if you're getting to YouTube through the outlines or through the schedule or whatever it is, subscribing is just a good way to make sure that YouTube is prioritizing our content in your feed. So doesn't cost you anything to subscribe. If you get a chance, please do that. Now, for new stuff. Today, we're going to talk about imposter syndrome, rubber ducking, which is going to sound crazy to you guys, but I swear it works. The celebrating different errors, which is a catchphrase that I think I got immortalized from cohort 1 and cover in every class from there. We're going to go over job titles, which is a resource one of our former instructors built out in terms of understanding kind of where we're going. We're going to talk a little bit about the homework, reading the free code camp blog post and thinking like an engineer. We are going to kind of talk about projects, right? And who's involved with a project and what does a project team look like. I want to do a quick tangent on the importance of a blog and how a blog has gotten someone sitting in that room a job. So I will touch on that. Karen, if you would actually like to say a couple words on that, I'm happy to shut up and let you talk about that. And then we're going to take a break after hearing me talk. And we are going to dive into actual hands-on project planning. And I'm going to pose one problem for you guys, and you are going to take charge from there. So I will give you some guidance on that, and I'll be taking live notes on all of that. But today we actually dive into working together as a class to actually start the first step of a project, which is super, super exciting. Based off of how long that takes, I'm going to show you a developer tool. Well, it's not just a developer tool, but it's often used by developers called diagrams.net. And your homework for this weekend will be based in diagrams.net. So we're going to dive into that after we finish our requirements gathering. I have a reading on imposter syndrome for you and a couple links down here. I linked to these TED Talks only because there are several of them and they're all really helpful. So if you find yourself battling imposter syndrome kind of later on in the cohort, you can always come back to this. But I'm going to take a moment just to see if there are any questions on any of that before we dive into imposter syndrome.
No questions.
Awesome. Okay. So I can talk about imposter syndrome, but I cannot state it as eloquently as the TED Talk has. So I'm actually going to pause the recording so we don't run into any copyright issues, and share my screen on imposter syndrome. Okay, so what did we get from that video?
I would say that a lot of people, tend to kind of feel the same way, like they kind of not necessarily don't belong, but you know what I mean? Like you aren't, either where you're supposed to be or, just like doubting yourself a lot. And we don't realize how often other people really feel the same way because it's kind of hard to share your feelings.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's not just feelings of feeling behind. It's really hard to share metrics, right? It's not easy to be like, "Okay, you're on the path to becoming a software developer. What percentage of a software developer do you think you are?" Right? That's not a number that you can just be like, "Oh, I'm 45% there." Like that's not something that you can just pick out of the air. And even someone like me who's been in professional development for over a decade, I would be like, I don't know. I probably know 65, 70% of web development, but I could talk to someone else who has 3 times as much experience as me, and they would go, oh, I probably only know 40% of web development, right? There's no easy standard there. There's no even test or certification, right? So it's so easy to fall into the trap of like, I don't really, I feel like I'm always learning, right? And that's actually what you should be doing as an engineer. But the downside to that is that there's always something else to learn. There's always something else where you feel like I'm never going to be able to get over this threshold, or I really am worried that I'm putting in all of this work and I feel like I'm not making any progress, right? And the fact of the matter is all of you are going to feel that at some point in this program. And when you feel that, the best way I have found to battle that is to go talk to someone else. Because chances are another student or another teacher is going to be able to help you through that. One of the reasons that we have moved our curriculum to be much more project-based is so that when you're feeling that imposter syndrome, you can just stop for a second and look back and say, all right, I'm only on week 3 of this program. Look what I have already built. I came in here on day 1 having a couple hours of prep work in Intro to HTML, and look, I know how to plan a project. And then we're going to add to that, right? And you're going to look back on week 5 or 6 and be like, wow, I built an entire Amazon product page, or I built a whole Netflix homepage, or, right? And we're going to go through this whole class, and you're going to get to the end of it, and even then you may start feeling like, I don't know if I'm ready for a career in this, right? Like the boot camp was great, but like I just went along for the ride. That's when it's important to look back at what you've done and say, hey, this isn't just what I did in those 24 weeks. This is making me ready for a career. And so that's what's important to keep in mind. Any questions there? Okay. So 2 things that you're going to run into. Rubber ducking and celebrating different errors. Rubber ducking sounds crazy, but there's a little story behind this. A manager walks into his team one day and sees one of his developers has a little rubber duck on his desk, and he goes, what's the rubber duck? Is that, significant for your kid? Is that, what's the meaning behind that? And the employee says, oh, that's my debugging duck. He goes, what do you mean you're debugging duck? And he goes, whenever I'm stuck on a problem, what I do is I turn and I look at that duck. I'm not looking at my monitors. And I talk out loud and I tell that duck what my problem is. And the manager laughs and goes, you're crazy. And he goes, no, you should try it. Next time you're stuck on a problem, you need to get out of your own head. So actually sit down, verbalize that, and see if that frees you up. Right? Same concept of what happens when you're in the shower or you're about to go to bed and you get that genius idea and you're like, that's it. That's what I needed. Same thing for the rubber ducking. You will trip over yourself. You will get in your own way and you will go so far into this problem that you really think you know where this problem is coming from that you'll lose out on something obvious. So when you get stuck on a problem, and it doesn't matter if you have Googled this, if you have taken notes on this, if you've tried it 1,000 different ways, sometimes the best thing to do is get up and walk away from the problem. And this happens especially frequently at night. When you've been coding for hours and hours on end, you don't realize how tired you are, and you're getting tripped up on something stupid. So the best thing to do in those situations, jot down notes of where you left off, where you're stuck, and what you've tried, and then walk away. No one can code for 12 hours on end and be just as good as a coder on hour 11 that they were on hour 1. Coding is a very intense thing for your brain, and focusing that long focusing that hard for that long just isn't feasible. So just walk away. Take notes and understand what you've tried, and then come back to it either the next morning, in a couple hours. Take those notes and read it to your rubber duck. If it's a spot on the wall, that is fine. If you've got a little teddy bear on your desk, that is fine. But just talk it out loud, and oftentimes that will get you unstuck. Which brings me to my next point. Celebrate different errors. And I'm sure Karen is chuckling off to the side there, because oftentimes we will get an error and be stuck on it, and we'll finally get it fixed, and the result is not great. Everything's running now and everything's working great. It's, oh, and now there's a different error. And you think, oh, I broke it. I broke it again. And it's not that you broke it again. It's that you fixed it one step closer to it working. Right? So when you get a different error, don't just say, okay, let me go fix this. Take a moment and celebrate your win. Go back, look at your notes. Go back, figure out what you did to get yourself unstuck, and pat yourself on the back and say, we are now one step closer to this working. Because there will be times, especially during DevOps and deploying, where you're just trying and trying and trying and it's not working. But what you're not realizing is you're making progress. You're getting closer and closer and closer to it working. So it's important to track your incremental progress. Take a moment, pat yourself on the back, and say, all right, we got something going. We're one step closer. It may not be fully working yet, but we're making progress. Anyone have an example of when that's happened to them? Doesn't have to be technical.
Yes, fixing a used car, fixing my truck.
That
Every
is a
single
great
time
example.
I would literally fix something and I would be happy, and then something else will break, and like a week later I'm dishing out more money to fix something else.
Very, very good example. Thank you for sharing. Okay. Believe it or not, we are nearing the end of my topic list, which means we're going to get you guys hands-on learning very soon. So we talked about all of these different job stacks yesterday, right? Or all these different tech stacks. And it's important to realize that there are a whole heck of a lot of job titles out there. And this is something that has really been blossoming in the past couple years. So over on the left-hand side of this column, these are the primary areas when it comes to being a developer. So there is visual and product design. And most of the time, anything in that yellow top section, these people are not writing code. These are people who are designing, who are figuring out color palettes, who are figuring out individual components. They are using applications like Sketch and Figma, or Adobe XD, or Photoshop, or Illustrator. These are people who are using visual tools to build something visual. And these people tend to interact with the end users and figure out, what's this supposed to look like for you? The visual design and product design all falls under the UI UX umbrella, but also so does everything on this list, right? And you may think, well, how is DevOps UI UX? I don't understand that. Well, if a server isn't working or taking a long time to run something, that's going to impact user experience. But in terms of who's closest to controlling the UI, that's going to be your visual design and product design. So oftentimes when you're working as a junior developer, you will be handed a mock-up from the visual design team, and they will say, hey, go implement this. Now, the bridge into that is this job title called design technologist. And that's someone who's not only doing the design, but also can get their feet wet in code, can also build out some of these components. They probably won't be doing anything full stack or in the back end or with the database, but they can at least write some HTML, CSS. They can put together not only a full mock-up, but they are able to also implement that in code. So little differences here. User experience researcher, they are solely going to be watching what users do and documenting it, right? They may not even be building anything new, or if they are building something new, it's going to be based off of their research. So all different kinds of interactions here. Any questions on visual design? We're actually going to start getting involved in that realm in the exercise after this. Front end. Now we're talking about code, right? Front end developer, front end engineer, UI engineer, all kind of doing the same things. When we get over to the right, that tends to be more involved of a role. Tends to be someone with a couple more years of experience. But these are people who HTML and CSS are their bread and butter. That is what they work on. Sometimes they have some JavaScript experience, but the reason we share this with you guys is because as you go throughout the program, you may find yourself gravitating towards one of these job titles, and that's okay. So we like to give you some context so that when you're on Indeed or any other job site and you're working with Laura and trying to find that perfect job to start your career in tech, it's important to know what all of these different job titles are. And the one thing I will note is that these job titles are not as standard as they should be. So you can find a job description on one site that calls something a web designer, and then go to another site and that job title is exactly the same, and what you find is what they're actually calling a web designer, or what you consider a web designer, is actually under the user experience designer role. So they sound like subtle differences, but it's important to read a job description and know, hey, the title may not necessarily actually match the skills for that job. So anyway, we move down from front end, who is going to be writing primarily HTML and CSS, and we move down to full stack. Full stack developers are just bridging that gap between back end and front end, right? So there are people where if you get handed a feature and say, I need the website to be able to do this, they know enough to be able to update the database, to update any API calls that need to happen in order to work with designers to figure out what the impact is on the UI, and also know enough HTML and CSS to make that change happen. So full stack developer is the most common title there. Application developer, website developer, quality assurance engineer, all kind of fall under that full stack realm. And it is completely fine. I'm a full stack developer. I know senior developers who get paid a whole lot more than me, who are only front end or only back end. So just because you're a full stack developer does not necessarily mean that you're going to be making more money, but it does expose you to a good range of skills. in order for you to kind of figure out, is this what I want to be doing? Or at the end of this boot camp, did I find that I really hated the back end stuff and really where I want to be spending time is front end, or vice versa? Doesn't matter to us. Back-end developers, data miners, system analysts, system architects, back-end developer. These are people who don't want to have to touch HTML, CSS, and possibly JavaScript if they don't have to, right? These tend to be people who lean into the database or who lean into building APIs. They have more limited exposure to the UI team because they are almost the furthest away from the UI team. And these are people who are just focusing on basically getting servers coded and working and spending as much time in the cloud as they can. And then finally, we get down to DevOps. And DevOps is a really wide-ranging category. This DevOps can range all the way from, hey, we've got a help desk, or we've got IT asset management, which is keeping track of what employees have what computers, and mice and software and all of that, all the way up to cloud security, cybersecurity, IT security. DevOps engineer would be someone who's managing servers, working with both front-end, back-end, and full-stack developers to make sure that their code, even though it worked on their computer, has been deployed and accessible to users. DevOps will work with the UI team to make sure that once a feature goes out, that it's behaving as expected, which is also a little part of QA. But DevOps is this wide-ranging field of basically, once I am done as a developer, what does it take to operationalize that and actually get it out into the hands of users? And then we've got this tech adjacent, right? Which is also another area where you could go through this whole program, come out as a confident full stack developer, and say, you know what, coding was great. I'm glad I learned all of that. But what I really want to be doing is project management. I think it's interesting breaking down a project, tracking what people are working on, and doing all of that work. A couple other things, communication specialist. Sometimes this goes into social media. Sometimes you become a technical writer and are the bridge between the developer and the user in terms of writing documentation and users guides and tooltips and instructions. Communication specialist can be really wide ranging there. SEO is search engine optimization. That's all about how can I get my website to show up higher on Google. So when someone does a search for careers in code, how do I make sure that my web page is set up so Google can read it so easily that they're going to prioritize me to the top of the page? Program manager or team lead, that is different at different organizations, but that is someone who is just managing other engineers, making sure that their team has all the resources that they need, that they're staying on track. Metadata cataloger, that is someone who is working with a large data set and figuring out how to tag that data set into smaller pieces to make it more easily accessible. Scrum Master goes back into project management. Scrum is is often taught with Agile as a project management methodology. And then final thing on that list is business analyst, right? Which is, hey, these are people who are technically minded and pulling off operations at a company, but they probably are not coders, right? These are people, business analysts and spreadsheets tend to have a lot of overlap. These are people who love writing formulas and love kind of making something happen, but may not necessarily be a coder. And so oftentimes you won't be working with with the end user of the software directly. You'll be working with the business analyst to figure out what it takes, what they need in order to get software to do what they need. Okay, any questions on that? Any job titles that are not on this list that you're curious about, or any job titles on this list that you would like more information about?
Does a customer success manager, is that something within a tech adjacent role, or is that not?
Yeah, I would definitely say it depends. Help desk tends to be down here. That tends to be internal to the company. So like, hey, I can't print for some reason. Can you help me print, right? All the way to, hey, I'm trying to do this in the software and it's throwing error code 123. Can you help me? Help desk tends to be internal. Customer success tends to be external customers, right? Normally calling into a help desk. But yes, a customer success, especially for a tech empowered company, I would consider tech adjacent.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? I would also add to that customer success may also not be a tech adjacent role because it could be, a customer success could be working at Walmart and, making sure that customers feel like they're having the best store experience they can and helping with returns or, complaints or anything like that. So customer success is one of those where it just depends what company that job title, what company is offering that job title.
Okay.
Other questions?
Where did you start?
Yep, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, where did you start? Like, what was kind of maybe your path when for you in tech?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So I started, um, believe it or not, I started out on a calculator. The first introduction that I had to programming was my TI-84 calculator that I had in 8th grade or in early high school. And I started writing programs on that because I thought it was dumb that we had to learn how to evaluate a formula when I could get the calculator to evaluate that formula for me. So I started on a calculator. Obviously, I'm not in that field anymore, and there is not a ton of job demand for that field. But from there, I went on to learning computer science fundamentals, which don't really fit on this chart. I guess it would fall more into back end if you forced me to pick one of them. But just how do I write a program that my computer can run? My first programming language was Java. I have not touched a line of Java code probably since that class. So I started in Java. From there, I learned website development, which was more front end. I then learned mobile app development and then moved on to databases. And then from databases, I finally came full circle and made it into the back end and understanding how to build APIs and get data from the database, show them in a website, all of that. And with that, that kind of completed my journey as a full stack developer. So my first job was full stack. But because I didn't have any DevOps experience or building anything for production, over 7 years, I kind of made my way up to CTO of this smaller tech startup. But becoming a full stack developer is what finally pushed me over the confidence line to say, like, hey, I could do a career in this, right? Like, I can build things that matter. And once I got to full stack, that's where I'm like, yeah, this is where I want to be spending my job. With that said, I know a lot of students who get all the way through this and go front end is it. Like, that is it. I want to make websites. I don't care about the back end stuff. That gets too complicated. I just want to make pretty websites, and that's completely fine. We have one student who loved the database module, and that's what they wanted to do. And there is a job title, not on this list, but it would probably fall under DevOps. Or backend, I guess, data developer. There was a database engineer, and all they do is design database tables and make sure data is saving properly and make sure databases are scaling properly. So we will be touching on a little bit of every single job title on this chart over the next 24 weeks. We won't be calling them out specifically by job title, but by the end of this, you will have at least a taste of what all of these jobs do.
Thank you.
No problem. Great question. Thank you for asking. Other questions from people?
Yes, I have a question. So when looking at like job posts after completing the program, what could we measure like our experience to? Because looking at them now, it's like they want, a lot of them want, like a degree in some sort, and then 3 to 5 years worth of experience. How will we measure that?
Yeah, so the thing that you want to be looking for in job postings is either junior or entry level. That tends to bring your job experience down from that 3 to 5 range into the 1 to 3. With that said, if there is a job that you're like, this is really close, but there are only 1 or 2 technical specs here where I'm like, oh, I don't know that at all, still apply for the job. There will be very few jobs that you are a perfect fit for. There will be a lot more jobs where you're a pretty close fit, and that close fit is going to land you the job. So, Laura will definitely help you on the career side. But coming out of this program, you will be a full stack developer, ready for a junior full stack job role. However, it is entirely possible in some companies you come out and they don't have a junior full stack developer. The only job position they have at a junior level is junior front end. And so at some companies, you work your way through front end, you prove that you're a good front end developer, and based off of that, you get opportunities to either move up to a senior front end developer or start leaning into more full stack work, back end work, databases, or DevOps. Um, so, uh, full stack JavaScript developer is the job title that is the closest fit for this program. However, that is certainly not the only fit for this program. And you may find that you get through this whole program and go, I want to go be a database architect, and that's what I want to be doing. And I need to go spend another couple months learning that and doing a deeper dive there. At which point we can definitely help you through mentorship and making sure you have the resources that you need to go ahead and continue on that path. But lots of different areas that you can go from here. If you find that full stack JavaScript is not what you're interested in, pretty much any full stack role for any kind of web app is going to be something that you can do. So if you find a full stack Ruby on Rails position or a full stack PHP or Django and Python role or any of those, we will be doing practice interviews later on in the program so that you'll have the ability to be able to confidently express that while I've never written a line of Python before, here are all of the concepts that I learned in the class, and because I learned them in JavaScript, that means that I can apply those concepts in a different language. And we'll have an add-on module the second to last week of class where you can pick, hey, maybe database engineering is something that I'm interested in, so I want to spend a week learning about that. Or, hey, I hear all of this stuff about WordPress and PHP. I'd love to spend a week on learning more details about WordPress. So lots of opportunities to go from there.
Thank you.
No problem. And if I ever don't answer your question and you find me rambling for 5 minutes and you still don't know what the answer to the question was, feel free to push back on me and tell me I didn't answer the question. With that said, any other questions? Okie doke.
I have a question.
If
Sorry. My bad.
No problem. Nicole, if you're in class, you should just be able to speak up and I should be able to hear you.
Oh, all right. So I wanted to ask, if I wanted to be like go on and be a software engineer, would I have to go and get like more schooling behind that?
No, so if
For software development?
if companies are if companies are doing the right thing, you won't need more schooling after this. We are going to teach you everything that it takes to get an entry-level job in software development. So we're going to cover all the computer science fundamentals. We're going to cover basically the way that I have been working on our curriculum and revising it is saying, what does it take for you? What topics do you need to know in order to go get a job, right? And if there are more advanced things, chances are you can learn them on the job. And that's just part of becoming a developer, is continuing to learn on the job. But our goal is to say, what does it take for you to be able to come in and say, I know enough about that I can go learn more and figure out how to do what you need to do. And so I am involved with a apprenticeship program that is part of the Syracuse Surge, which is also part of the funding for this program. And the apprenticeship is targeting people with not only 4-year college degrees, but people with either college certificates, associates degrees, or boot camp graduates. And the whole point of that program is to ease you into the workforce and make sure that you have the opportunities and the resources that you need to make sure that your career is taking off. But it's a great question. No, you do not need additional schooling after this. You do not need to come out of a boot camp and go right into an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree. There will, of course, be some companies that say, we only hire these developers, or we only hire people with college degrees. But there are more and more companies saying, hey, what you learned in 6 months in this boot camp is actually closer to what we need as a developer than someone who has taken this entire course load and never connected the dots, right? A big problem with a lot of college grads is they take all these courses, but there's no course at the end to be like, now let's use all of this accumulation of knowledge to tie things together. So a lot of new hires come into the workforce and they know the entire tech stack the employer is using, but they've never put those pieces together and literally stacked them on top, right? And so everything that we do in this class, we are doing project-based, and we are actually getting hands-on so that when you get to the end of this, you can say, full stack JavaScript, no problem. You need a database, I know how to get the database set up. You need a backend server, I know how to set up an API. You need, whatever it is that job requires, we're making sure that you have those pieces to go out and go from there. So great question. No, you should not need a additional education. However, you should always be learning as an engineer, right? And it's important that your workforce supports you in that. It's important that you find the right work-life balance and find a way to incorporate that into your schedule. But at the end of this program, no, you should not have to turn around and find additional schooling right away unless you are going into a field other than full stack development and want to hone your skills there, at which point plenty of resources available.
Thank you.
No problem. Last chance for questions on job titles. Okie doke. So I've got three more quick topics, and then we will take a break. And when we come back, we are going to dive into our first project. Just to give you a little taste of that, the project is going to be, I am CEO of a new car company, and I would like a car where I can control most of the car's functionality on a touchscreen. Design the touchscreen for me. So that is what we are getting to and what we'll be diving into after the break. But until then, couple quick things that I wanted to hit on. Did anyone have some thoughts to share from that Free Code Camp article about kind of thinking like an engineer? What does it mean to you guys to think like an engineer?
What you just explained about starting from the web browser, then going through the API to the database. So like the stack that you mentioned, being able to stack everything together.
Yep. Yeah. So to me, what thinking like an engineer means is being able to take this huge project where you don't even know where to start and break it up into pieces. And from those pieces, break it up into even more pieces, right? So a good engineer is not just someone who can write code that the computer runs. A good engineer is someone who is able to take a complex problem and break it down into pieces small enough that those pieces are something that becomes action items, right? And action items just mean I know where to start. If you give me this one little thing, I can get that one little thing done and chain it on to the next little thing. And by the time that we have 100 little things chained together, we've got the whole project done, right? And so thinking like an engineer and not just like a coder is saying, hey, how do I take a technical idea, break it up into a small enough piece that my brain is able to actually execute on those ideas? And then also, can I make sure that I can share that technical idea maybe with a non-technical person to make sure that they understand how the project is going? And that brings me to my next point here, which is all about understanding project involvement. When you work on a project, you are not just going to be working as one engineer. Chances are you will be working in a team of engineers. And you think, okay, that's it. Well, you've got your project manager, right? Your project manager is keeping track of the whole team. And you may also have someone who is, that role may be split. You may have a project manager who's just keeping track of tasks. And then you may also have a team lead who is making sure the dynamics and the communication is open, right? And then on top of that, you're going to have either project stakeholders or users, right? Who are going to be saying, here's why we need this project. And you're going to need to be able to communicate with them and ask them questions and receive feedback from them. You also may be working with a business analyst, right? They may be your middleman between the work that's actually coming out of your software and the code itself, right? So it's important to understand who is involved with a project, because 9 times out of 10, it's not just going to be you or other engineers. And it's very important when you start working on a project to not only identify who is involved with the project, but what they do on the project and what their expectations are. And so important to understand multiple people are involved in a project, and that there's something called the Software Development Lifecycle, the SDLC. And we're going to be diving into that a little bit more later this week. With all of that said, and then I promise I will give you guys a break and stop talking, and class is about to get a whole lot more engaging. Karen, actually, do you want to take this next point about your blog experience?
Yeah, I can. So it's not a requirement, but it actually will help you guys. Maybe some of you, maybe not, but it helped me. When I went through the program, I took probably, I think it was once a month, I started writing a blog post. It was something that they recommended. And I mean, you guys can see it. I'm still messing with the website, so it's kind of ugly. But if you go to kethorn.com, you can read my blog posts from when I was in the cohort. And then I kind of continued along the way, you know, getting a job. And it's about my experiences as I went through, right? And you can see it, like in the beginning, oh my God, what did I get myself into? I can't do this. You know, it's the whole, like Max was talking about, imposter syndrome. And then as you're going through and other little hurdles that you jump over, things that drive you crazy. In my project, my capstone project, I had to create a different type of image, right? I had to do, instead of doing a JPEG, I needed an SVG. So it took me a week to get that image the way that I needed to. I was ready to like just, I'm done, I can't do this, I'm not gonna be able to get it. I was ready to walk away from like the whole program at one point. But you overcome those hurdles, and then when you go back and you start reading and you're like, wow, I've done a lot and I've accomplished a lot. And it helps you. Sometimes it'll help you learn more of the concepts. You go through something and then you're like, okay, I need to go through this and start writing about it. What did I do? What did I learn? And it helps other people learn sometimes. It doesn't necessarily have to be like technical of like, this is the code that I wrote and this is how I wrote it. You can do that. That might help you if you write a blog that way. But you can also make it about your experiences of the hurdles that you had to overcome in order to get to where you need to be.
Yeah, and the point of writing these blog posts is not only just to battle imposter syndrome, which I know we are keep on coming back to, but the point of these blog posts is to humanize you when other people review your blog, right? And my biggest advice for your career search is find a way to stand out. And when you apply to some of these companies, they are going to have thousands of applicants, and you're going to be just another resume, just another boot camp grad. How are you going to stand out? And Laura will have all kinds of tips for you. But one thing that I know Karen had this experience, applied somewhere, and they saw her resume and saw that she had a blog and clicked onto the link, and all of a sudden they read through 6 months of Karen's journey about how she could prove that she was a good writer, she was a good storyteller, she understood problems, she understood how to engineer her way out of a problem. And all of a sudden, when Karen showed up for her first interview, it wasn't the standard, hey, these are the questions that we ask every applicant. It became a discussion about her blog posts and her personal journey, and not just tell me about a time when, right? And so that blog post is a way for you to stand out. But if you think, oh, I'll just write a blog post at the end of the boot camp, you're going to forget your journey throughout the whole experience. So the way I personally like to think about it is use your blog as a journal, right? And even if it's a short little post, even if it's something that you say like, hey, every Sunday, I'm just going to spend a couple minutes and just document what I got done. I highly encourage you to do that. We will have a portfolio site at the end of, we'll actually start working on your portfolio in week 5 of the boot camp, but we will definitely be able to link to your blog, and we'll be able to link to both your portfolio and, if you choose to do one, a blog on the Careers in Code alumni page, which has a decent amount of web traffic because of the entire Hack Upstate employer network. 2 places I can recommend to get started on a blog are Blogspot, which is owned by Google, and Medium. Medium, I think, .com. Medium's a really nice, clean interface for creating a blog fast, and is free, as is Blogspot. We don't really have a preference. Wherever you create your blog is fine. If you've got WordPress experience, you're welcome to use WordPress. WordPress can become a rabbit hole of, especially to someone technically minded, of fiddling with everything. The most important thing on your blog is content, right? So like just getting in the regular schedule of blogging about something. I am in the middle of a very long blog post ranting about Apple and how hard it was to get a bulk volume discount on the laptops that you're sitting in front of right now, and how it took 4 different websites to place that order, right? And so you can blog about anything, but you guys have already started an awesome journey, and being able to share that journey and document that journey is going to make you stand out with employers. So really hope that you guys get a blog started. If you do, please share it in the CIC Student C3 channel, because I bet your fellow students would also be interested in reading your blog posts. With that said, go ahead, Karen.
I was going to say they do, because when in cohort 1, when I started mine, I don't really know if anybody else did mine, but I know that a couple of people had read it and they were like, oh my God, I was dying laughing because I'm really sarcastic in my blog. And some people will leave comments. So it's a good, it was a good experience for me. It allowed me to go back and reflect upon all the hurdles that I had overcome during the whole program.
Awesome. With all of that said, I have talked enough, so we are going to take a break. Would you guys prefer 20 or 30-minute break?
20 is fine.
20? Okay. So let's meet back at 7:05. Sorry about that. Okay, so once we get our our requirements together, we get our wireframes done, we go back and forth on the wireframes, we make any modifications that we need, then we go on to the next step, which is mockups. And that's when the designer takes the wireframes and what we call skins them. They put in colors, they put in textures, they decide exactly what kind of icon they would like. They make it to the point where it is pixel perfect, meaning that when I hand this to the developer should be able to code all of this out. And so when the developer has it all coded out and is all done, whatever the final result is should match the mockups. And if that's the case, when the product owner comes back and says, well, I don't like the way this is working, as a development team, you can go back to the mockups and say, well, this is exactly how it is in the mockups. Why didn't you voice your concern there? And the reason why that's important is because every step along that process you go makes it harder to change whatever change needs to be done. So when the person says, oh, I don't really like the fact that music is buried into the system, the wireframe person can say no problem, right? And they just drag things around and fix it, and it's good to go. That gets harder in mockups, and even harder once you get to the coding phase. So once you get to the coding phase, when you need to make a change, you've got to change the entire navigation. You've got to move code around into different files. You need to maybe update several files worth of code. You need to maybe work with another team to make sure your changes aren't impacting someone else's changes. There's a whole heck of a lot going on there, right? And then it gets even worse if they want to make the change after it goes through quality assurance and to DevOps and ships. Well, now customers are used to it being in a certain place. So now you need to really justify, hey, is this change worth it? And so this is the phase where you want to be asking all of those questions, because if we get all the way to going to ship a product and we realize that we forgot something as simple as how do we turn on the seat heater, well, that's going to cause all kinds of problems of trying to shove that in somewhere and make sure the UI team is okay with it, and make sure the developers can make it work, and make sure QA can go through and test it to make sure it's working the way the developers think it should be working, and then to go out and release that to customers. With that spiel said, back to my car company CEO hat, what else would we need to be able to control if the only thing in the center console was a touchscreen?
I have a question.
Yes.
I don't know if this is something to go on the list, but would this sync with your telephone?
Yes.
Okay, are the lights working for it, or do you want it to control the seats, like the hazard lights or the regular lights? Seat control, or is that gonna be a door panel?
Would the screen come on automatically when you get inside the car, or would you have to turn it on?
Turn on the steering?
The screen.
The screen itself.
Oh,
the power, does it automatically come on, or do you have to turn it on?
Do you want like a welcome screen or anything that displays the logo when the car first turns on?
No welcome screen. Just show the most relevant information at the onset.
You want buttons in the steering wheel that control the touch screen? Increase or decrease volume without having to touch the touch screen, or controls?
Do you need a passcode to access stuff on the screen when you get in the car?
Or your finger. What's called? Yeah, use your finger.
Nah, we'll just make it so their phone is the key. So if they have they'll just use their phone to get into the car.
Well,
Electric or gas?
What's that?
What about if it's like an electric car or a gas car?
Great question. Let's assume that it's an electric car.
Will this be able to be used by multiple users, or is it only specific to the car owner?
Multiple user profiles should be supported.
Okay, so that means you need like a settings button or maybe buttons where it will take you to, because this is just the screen when you get in the car, okay, and then you turn on the car and then you can see like the AC and everything else. So, and you said that only needs 7 buttons in the front. So obviously you should be able to click somewhere where you can go control other options of the car, but this is just the front interface that we are coding, right?
Yeah, so I'm going to sum that up to say interface should have some kind of nav bar or dock to be able to switch between functionalities.
And what about charging? Like, will this charge when the car charges? Will it be the life once it's charged?
It's attached to the car like a Tesla, right? Is this the concept? Is this like a Tesla thing?
It could be.
Okay.
Is it
that's what I'm
solely
thinking,
touch screen, or is it an optional voice control as well? Or do you want it to tell you back what you're doing? Or is that going too far in?
So we've got voice control added to the list. So there should be aspects of that you can control from voice control. We won't go too far down that rabbit hole because we're focusing on UI here and not overall UX. But yes, that is totally a thing that during project planning, you should be able to say, hey, if you want voice control, what are all of the things that the voice control needs to be able to control? So that is a totally legitimate question. I'm just gonna cap it at that and say we don't need to worry about that too much.
It's an electric car, so it needs like power display, and I don't know if they have like a cover to the electric car. Car should charge that.
Can it drive itself? Like, if I wanted to like put it on.
No, it's not.
No.
No.
I can see it already. No.
What about the navigation bar? Can you do you want it to be customizable, like different buttons to be shown first?
No need to make this customizable.
Is it going to also be like a screen, so you know, like when you back up and the cameras are showing what's around you? Does it have to do dual duty?
What about like a weather and temperature display?
What else do you think of when you think of weather and temperature?
Time.
What would be the screen size? Like, how big of a screen are we gonna have?
Let's say 15 inches.
That's bigger than our laptop.
It sure is.
Well, then it should be able to play movies too.
Right.
Oh. It's the car of the future, right? So we're thinking big here. We're thinking big screens. We're thinking everything's on the touch screen. What else? You guys have hit most of everything that I can think of.
Well, if it's playing movies, would there maybe be a second screen in the back seat?
Oh yeah, the headrest. And the headrest for the kids in the bus.
No display in the second row.
Can you FaceTime on it?
Hmm.
Or was it?
For safety reasons, no way to video call from car, although it needs to support regular phone calls.
But what if you have it so that you can video call when the car is not in motion?
Yeah.
Or when the car is in park?
We're just going to say that you can't do that for now. Although, if you can... Oh, okay, yeah. We're just going to say you can't do that for now. Okay,
Like
so...
Gauges and like engine temperature, oil temperature, stuff like that.
Yeah, so let's just call that car maintenance and report out.
Mm-hmm.
Would that include,
The speed, you know?
you know, maybe you get warnings sometimes if you're too close to another car or going off the lane?
Right, sensors.
Good car.
I want one.
Okay, Max, I got a question for you. What if they don't have a smartphone?
Well, this would be smart.
Where did I put the phone? Needs to support backup key method. Anything else that you guys can think of? By the way, the link to this is in the week 1, day 2 outline. So if you would like to pop this open to, be able to scroll through it, you can totally do that.
It's also in Slack for the live stream.
Oh, yeah.
Channel.
Yeah, I put it in there as well. Okay. Any last chance to add any features? Okay, so from here, we've got a long list of things. But what we need to do is break some of these features down, because there is a lot of functionality in just saying music, right? There's a lot of functionality in just saying AC and heat. So what we really need to be able to do is break this down into smaller pieces of functionality. The problem that we run into is that there are some things on this list that just say easy to use. Well, okay, that can be a requirement, but at the same time, there aren't any like sub-features that when we're designing the UI that we need to specifically hit to make sure that easy to use is in there. So what we should do from this point is take this list and break it down into what are our core functionalities, and based off of those core functionalities, what are the sub-feature sets that are required to make that work. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to create a new section called core functionality. And we're going to start breaking this out. Touchscreen will not drive the car. There will be a steering wheel and traditional pedals. Okay, well, that's not really core functionality, right? That's not something that we need to design into the UI. That's just general project information. Easy to use. Okay, that's another just general product thing, right? Shouldn't require more than several presses of the screen. General thing. Car should be able to start from the touchscreen. Okay, that to me sounds like a sub-requirement, not an actual core functionality. What would the core functionality of this be? What could we kind... Exactly, controls. So we're going to take that out of the list. We're going to come down here and do a new section for controls. And we are going to paste that in. Okay. Music. Oh, I'm sorry. Windows should be controlled by buttons on the door and won't be part of the screen. Okay, so that's kind of part of controls, but it's still just general information, right? The only thing that we are really going through this list for is to figure out, hey, is this something that we need to design into the UI? So we come down here, music. Does that feel like a core functionality, or does that feel like a specific action item that we need to design around?
Core functionality.
I would agree. So I'm going to come down here and we're going to start a new one for music. And we're going to have to fill that in. Okay. Let's see. Seat warmer. That to me, it kind of lumps into AC and heat, right? That's all kind of part of, let's call it climate control. So
Yep.
we're going to lump all of that together. Is it going to let me lump that together? No, it's not going to let me do bullets. That's fine. Climate control. And we are going to get into climate control, and we already identified seat heaters. And we identified AC and heat. All right, great. We're making good progress. We can take those off the list. Maps and GPS. That seems like core to me. So we're going to take that off the list and come down here and add that. Okay. Security alarms and locks. What do we think about that? Is that core functionality, or is that something that can go either into an existing category or needs its own category?
Or
Yeah, I would agree that I think that can all fit under controls. Voice control. I think that is a big enough feature that it gets its own list. Okay.
Usually with cars, voice control, like phones fall underneath that, because you have to set up your phone with it.
Yeah, okay, so Windows, we already did that. Phone and lights. I'm going to say that phone is probably its own standalone screen. But I'm going to say that lights falls under controls. Okay, screen will come on automatically when you get in the car. General information, no welcome screen. Steering wheel buttons will control voice control and volume of music. Maybe that's something we need to factor in of, like, is there some UI feedback when the wheels get moved or we activate voice control? But for now, we're going to just leave it in the general information. No need for passcode. Phone is the key. Needs to support backup key method. That, I think, is worthwhile to put into under controls. Locks, let's say, key methods, phone, and backup key. Okay, multiple user profiles. I think that falls under controls. All right, we're getting somewhere. Car should show charge status of entire car. And now we're getting into a couple things here that's saying, there's some general information report out here, right? There's sensor information, there's current speed. There's probably needs to be something on the screen that is always on the screen to show the current information. Because if we think through this, if there's no speedometer in front of the wheel, right? If there's no driver screen, we don't want someone to be in their GPS screen or their music screen or their control screen and not be able to see the speed they're going. So I'm actually going to report this out. Instead of just having controls, we're going to add a new one that says
display.
Persistent display.
Persistent display, persistent status, let's call it. And we're able to move current speed, sensor information into that. And we can also add this interface, right? Navbar or dock, that definitely has to be persistent. So we're going to say navbar or dock. Okay. Should be able to open charger door. That can go under controls, but something like car should show charge status of entire car, that could go under persistent status, right? Because we always could see a gas tank gauge. We probably want to know how charged the battery is. All right, did I skip anything up here? Nothing there, nothing there. navbar, we got self-driving tech. That's another team. We don't need to worry about that. Backup camera. That's probably something that deserves its own thinking through. So we can backup camera, add that to the list, and take it off here. Time and temperature. That probably needs to be persistent, right? We want to see that everywhere. Okay, 15-inch display. That's just basic information. Movies and theater functionality. I'm going to move that to its own list.
So will we have like maybe an entertainment and music and movies can kind of be in that same section?
Music.
Yeah, I'm going to suggest, because the movies and theater can only be used when the car is in park, but music can always be used. So my suggestion would be to keep that as a separate section. Okay. No display in second row, no video, and then car maintenance and issue report out. We can add that here. Car maintenance and issue reporting. Okay. What do you guys think of that process so far?
So far, so good.
Okay. So what we're going to do now is jump into these sections. And what we're actually going to do, once we get these kind of fleshed out with all of their own bullet points of what does music need to do, what does, you know, maps and GPS and voice control and all of that stuff, what we are going to do is actually work together on this control screen. And we're going to figure out, how do we design the screen to make sure that it can do all of these things, in addition to having our nav bar and dock in some kind of basis to get started. From there, we are going to break into groups, and you guys are going to use the diagrams.net tool, which we are going to do the controls and the persistent status in. And we'll break into like groups of like 3 or 4. And you guys can fight amongst yourselves to figure out which of these sections you would like to design. And that will actually be your weekend project for the homework. So when you turn everything in by Sunday, you will just have that one screen designed based off of our starting point, which we will be working on in class together. But that will become more apparent as we get into diagrams.net and as you start seeing us kind of figuring out the tools. But before we can get out of requirements planning, let's kind of flesh out some of these ideas, because frequently you'll go into a meeting and all you'll do is just type and type and type, right? And you get this long list of things and you're like, whoa, that was a lot. So next step, thinking like an engineer here, is to not only gather all of the information, but start pulling that information apart. Because now what we can do is say general project information and make this its own section, right? So now we are able to come down here into core functionality, and because we pulled out each of those little things, we're able to come down here and say, hey, controls, we've got a pretty good idea on. Persistent status, like, hey, this is the core of the screen. And you know what? We've got some pretty good information going on here. But music, oh man, how did we get through the entire client section and not ask them more questions about music? All right, well, that's okay. We'll schedule another meeting with them. We'll bring them back in. Or we know enough about music, but before we dive into the wireframes, we need to make sure that we've got music thought through, because once we start wireframing, it's going to be easy to forget about little things there. So what in music control do we need to make sure that we can do in the music section of this touchscreen?
Play music.
Shuffle music?
Repeat.
Play app, use apps.
We're going to say play
adjust the different.
Dive into those apps a little bit more. What would the app allow you to do?
The streaming app.
And if you're going to stream something, what do you need to be able to tell it?
If my playlist.
No, like, did we even say this is gonna have Wi-Fi?
So, yeah.
We did say
Yeah,
that?
we said Bluetooth. Now the phone will have the Wi-Fi.
Well, some cards come with Wi-Fi.
That's what I was
Some
saying.
cards-
To adjust the different tones, like the bass, the mid, and so on.
Right, so like if we think about the Spotify app or the Apple Music app or the Pandora app or wherever you stream your music, now we have to start thinking about those apps. And as a developer, frequently we would actually pull up one of those apps and say what functionality is in this app and what needs to go into the car. So it's actually very common to reference other software in order to figure out, hey, what else do we need to add to this, right? And so if we think about Spotify or Apple Music, we need to be able to select which music to play. And sometimes that music comes from a playlist. But in order to be able to select what music we need to be able to play, oftentimes there is a browse section and there is a search section, right? And we might say this is the suggestion section, right? Of what they recommend you play. We have play, pause, repeat. What else is core to a music app where if we're playing music, what else does that need to be able to support?
Genre.
What was that?
Genre.
Sure. We could select what music to play by genre.
Music
The ability
volume.
to skip.
Yep. Play music. Skip. You're missing an obvious one.
Volume.
Volume. And I'm going to say that, hey, that shouldn't necessarily be in music. That should actually be under persistent. So we're going to start coming in here and say play, pause, skip. Probably needs to be persistent. And you know what else needs to be persistent? Volume needs to be persistent. And I'm just going to flag those here as persistent.
Max, when you say persistent, do you mean in the sense that if we have the music app open that stays on, or it just stays on all the time?
It stays on all the time. So if I'm in my GPS app and I don't have music open anymore, I still want to be able to turn down my music without having to go back into the music app. I just want to be able to turn down the volume. And so we're going to make play, pause, skip, and volume persistent always.
Okay.
Or you know what? Let's just make volume the only persistent one. And then we'll leave play, pause, skip as part of the app. There's one more obvious one that's missing.
Bluetooth?
Wi-Fi.
Bluetooth and Wi-Fi we'll just assume get set up in the controls area. But we'll add that in here as Bluetooth connection.
Regular radio.
Fast forward.
Regular radio is good. Fast forward, we'll just kind of keep that all under play, pause, skip. There's one obvious one that you guys still haven't hit.
Being able to connect to outside things.
No, we'll just assume that there's one streaming service that pulls in the music that you're browsing, and the ability to, I'm gonna say radio and say switch sources.
The display, like the visualization, or like the album art, or
You're on the right track. If we have album art showing, what else should we also probably be showing?
the artist.
Song name.
Oh, what music?
Yeah.
Song name, artist, album art.
So then, well,
Like your favorites.
Yeah, let's say that's all gonna be favorites or library.
So the music that's currently playing, that'd be part of the persistent display?
Yeah, I think it falls like even with the when you said like the play and pause, like once you open the music app, those things would be considered persistent at that.
Yeah, so
At that.
once the music app is open, all of these are available. But until the music app is open, the only thing that you would be guaranteed to be able to control is volume. Now, you guys are making a good point, though, of, hey, do I always want to be able to see what music is playing? And if I'm listening to the radio and the radio is not broadcasting the name, I don't really want that on my screen. I know what radio station I'm listening to. But there may be times that I do want it on my screen always and times that I don't. So that is a good question to kind of play out when you're doing your design and saying, hey, how much screen space do I have here? Do I want to make that persistent or maybe I don't? And we're going to leave that up to the team working on music to figure that out, right? And because there will be some collaboration that has to happen here to say, hey, I'm working on the music app, you're working on GPS. I would really like to be able to show the name of the song, but also be able to show the GPS information. And so now you're going to have to work with the GPS team to figure out how you can steal some of their screen space to show that information. So there's a lot of collaboration going on here, but I think the music app is pretty well thought out. What we're going to focus on. Yep, go ahead.
I think you didn't answer my question. What I mean is, of course, you'll be able to select those things, but at some point in time, even if the music is not playing or it's not displayed, the volume, if you're in the music, like if you have your music on and there's not a song on, those things, even like the play button, you have to be able to play and stop the music. You know, if it's the music's not playing, play, pause, stop will still display on the screen persistently as long as you're in the music app. Until you press play, that's when the music will display. But the play is persistently just showing, and the volume is also persistently showing in any vehicle you're in when you turn your music on, whether the song is on or not. So you had it there first for persistent display, but then you took it off. But those are always like shown.
Not necessarily. If I'm not playing any information, why do I need a play pause button on the screen?
So you can press play on the screen and the music will start to play. And then that's when you'll see a song display. But then your volume still will be controllable and it will still show, as well as the play, stop, skip, all of those still are persistently shown, whether music is playing or not. If you open up the music section on any device, vehicle, or whatever.
Right. I think what he was saying is that just say you're not playing the music, right? So you still need to be able to control volume, so maybe for a phone call or something of that nature. But like you said, once you open the music app, then all that stuff is going to be there, persistent.
But then, okay, but how do you open the music app if you
like when you press music and then your volume will show until you select a song, play, next, all of those things display.
You can't select the song if you don't have the option to push play.
So here,
right.
This navbar dock is what is going to control the ability to get into music or climate control or GPS or any of those. So if you think about this on your smartphone, this navbar dock is going to essentially be your home screen. And in order to get into if you think about your phone, there is no play button consistently showing, right? In order to get into the play button, you have to open the music app. Same thing going on here. We're going to have a navbar dock, and one thing's always going to be open.
I'm opening my phone now, and if you scroll down on an iPhone, the play button is displayed where the music would be playing. So even if I'm not, it's still showing there. It's still away from
right. But if you close the music app and you go to Safari, even if music is playing.
And I'm just thinking of this as an example. Like if I'm doing the music section, because we're all breaking down into groups. If I do the music section and of course, we could get through to music through the nav bar, but display on the screen, you know, on music, is the volume, like you're even in your car, your volume is still it's still showing.
Yeah, so what I'm gonna say there is that it's gonna operate just like your smartphone. On your smartphone, if you start music playing and then open another app, you can always control volume because there are buttons on the side of your phone to turn volume up or down. But if you're in another app and you want to pause your music, the only way to pause your music is to go back to the music app and hit pause. So that's how we're going to design it for the car. We're going to say, hey, you can always control volume. So if you want to turn it up or down, you can. But if you want to skip to the next song, switch back to music, and then you'll be able to do that. Does that make sense?
More.
Okay. So let's keep going here. For climate control, for seat heaters, this should be pretty easy, right? We just need to say set heat level, and we'll just say low, medium, high, right? Should be a pretty easy one, and we probably want to factor off into that. But when we get, Zach, you got a question.
Yeah, I don't know if this is like a stupid question or not, but how many like functions are we gonna have actual like physical buttons for, and how much stuff is going to be controlled through the touch screen? That's like, are you saying that there's going to be like a knob to control volume and it's also controllable by the touch screen, or is it only controllable through the touch screen?
We're going to say it's only controllable through the touch screen and then a knob on the steering wheel, or a button on the steering wheel.
But there won't be any buttons on the touch screen at all, right?
Correct.
Awesome.
Okay, for AC heat, what are the basic things that we need to control AC heat wise?
And
Temperature.
temperature,
And speed.
both passenger, driver, backseat.
The mode, so is it gonna be on AC or is it gonna be on heat?
Let's say, yeah, let's say AC button. What else? Fan speed, AC, temperature.
What about when you bring the air in from, or you, air from the inside? Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, plus the door one.
One more obvious one you're missing there.
Nicole said defrost.
That's a good one. Not the one I was thinking of, but definitely one to add.
Are these going to be, like how
is it going to be displayed?
Yeah, how is it going to be displayed on the screen?
Great question. Let's add that to persistent status.
Oh,
Is it gonna be Fahrenheit or Celsius?
right, defrost, the regular air in your face and then on your feet. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. That's the one I was thinking of. Where is the air coming from? And we'll just say top, middle, or bottom.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that covers it. Anything else that's missing? I'm sorry, did someone say something?
Well, I was gonna just say in the heat, like.
Can we have a cool, since this car is fancy, can we have a seat cooler? Because when it's hot.
We'll just say no seat coolers, only heaters.
Car is fancy though.
It's how to get cold.
All right, what if you lived in Florida?
No seat, AC, just heaters. Okay. All right. Now this is going to be the last one we're going to do, and then we're going to get into diagrams.net. We may not be able to start the group work until tomorrow, and that is completely fine. And a recurring theme that you will find is that I overplan for courses or for classes, and then don't have the time to get to them. But that is okay because I do 3 days of planning, and then I end up having enough content in those 3 days to span the whole 4 days. So there's no big deal that we may just start on diagrams.net and make sure you guys can get an account created. And then we'll have this requirements planning document as our starting point for tomorrow. So all of these voice control, phone, Bluetooth, backup camera, movies, and theater, those are not going to be options for you to pick from. So when we break out into groups, you guys can decide, do I want to either work on, we may do the controls as a group. So the 3 group options are going to be music, climate control, and maps and GPS. And then depending on how long persistent status takes us, we may have controls as an available 4th option. And if not, we'll break that out into a 4th group. Make sense for everyone? Cool. All right. Maps and GPS. Give me basic functionality there.
We have to have a search bar and a keyboard, like a touchpad keyboard.
Yeah, I'm going to say enter address, and that needs to have a keyboard, an on-screen keyboard.
Or voice control.
Yeah, it should have your current location.
Uh,
Voice navigation.
Now, I'm going to put an asterisk on that because that is more user experience than it is user interface, meaning that there's nothing to design into the interface to make voice control work. However, it is a good point, and so I'm going to leave it in there as just an asterisk for whoever works on it.
Okay.
But is definitely, when we think about project requirement planning, that is totally a worthwhile thing to throw out because we need to plan for it. It just happens to be something that leans over the user interface category and into that user experience category. So I'm glad you brought it up because it's important to identify those early on.
Would like, I don't know how to explain it, but like real-time navigation, is that more user experience? You know how like sometimes when you're using a GPS or map and it'll show you where you've got to go, but it's not like physically keeping up with you as you're driving, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so I'm going to break that down. I know what you're getting at. We're going to say must show next turn. Okay. We're going to say must show route on map. Think of that as like your blue line, so to speak.
Yep.
Must be able to pan around map and return to current nav to current position. And we're going to say should probably be able to cancel your navigation.
Remember frequently visited locations.
What was that?
Remember frequently visit like locations.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
About like if there's a car crash or traffic or a street that's not being used.
Your traffic information.
We will say traffic information coming at a later date, just so we don't overload features too much.
The kind of map that you're going to use, so satellite image, 3D, 2D.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. What type of GPS system is it? Is a GPS system like an operating system? What do we?
Yeah, that all.
Use one that's already made, or?
Nope, we have to design it all from scratch ourselves. So we're gonna say map type, road, terrain, satellite.
Do we want it to be able to show us suggestions, like when you're hungry and you just type in fast food or something like that, and it shows what places are open, or you know?
We'll just assume that that's built into, let's say, enter address or name. So you could type in fast food, and we'll just assume that it will detect that it's not an address and search for, you know, all the McDonald's or all the fast food restaurants.
How about how long it will take to get there, or the quickest way?
Well, right, they give you like 3 different choices and you pick the route, yeah.
Like, do we need to build in options like no toll roads or no tolls or highways or things like that?
Let's assume that it's not going to give you multiple routes.
Okay.
What about making the speaker quiet, like when it's directing you?
Let's just say ability to toggle voice nav on off.
And then maybe override anything else that might be playing at the time. So override music or a movie.
You
or
just have like some
whatever.
navigation settings, so you can change like your display if you need to, or anything like that.
Make it go low, like make the music go low when it's time to click on.
Yeah,
radio.
let's just assume it's going to do that. That's kind of not an option for you to turn on or off, that it's always going to turn down the music when it plays a prompt. What about other map functionality in terms of when you're using Google Maps? Like, in addition to being able to pan around the map, what else should you be able to do with the map?
Drop the pin.
Make multiple stops on the way.
Multiple stops and pins are good features. Let's just say that those are coming later. The one that I was getting at was, I definitely said pan somewhere in here. Pan around current, control zoom level.
That's what I was saying.
Recenter your position.
Recenter is return to current position. So we got that.
What about the ability to reroute? Are we assuming that that's already built in?
Yeah, let's assume that rerouting will just happen when you make a wrong turn.
Okay.
Right, because that's another thing where it's like user experience, it definitely has to be factored in, and we have to make sure that that requirement works. But from a user interface perspective, there's nothing we need to do to make it reroute.
Okay.
All right.
I know this doesn't come up a lot anymore, but compass.
I was just gonna say that, compass.
It's a good one.
Sometimes it told me it's south
it tells
or
you
north
where
or
you are,
something, and I'm like, my car doesn't tell me which direction that is.
All right, so we're gonna save all of these. We are going to say not MVP. And MVP is a very, very important term for you guys to learn, and that is minimum viable product, not most valuable player. You will never hear me make a sports reference. You can be assured of that. Minimum viable product is all about what do we need to do in order to get this product not only out the door with the smallest number of features, but the smallest number of features that will actually make this product usable. And when we say usable, we mean viable, right? And so minimum viable product, and this is something that you guys are going to have hammered into you as soon as you start your capstone. Hey, that's a great feature. I love that you're thinking about that. I think it would be an awesome opportunity to use it. I'm sure your end users would love having that feature in, but do they need that feature in your product in order to be able to start using it viably? And if the answer to that is no, that feature goes back into your project management backlog and does not come out until you have all of your MVP features done. So all of these are important things. But we're saying, hey, for the first version of this car, we don't need voice control. We don't need phone control. We're not going to plan them out yet because what we need to plan on is these most important features. Maps or GPS, climate control, music, the persistent status, and then basic car controls. Okay, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break just because that's a very productive exercise. Did anyone think at the beginning of this planning process that we would have easily a 2-page, 3-page document just in an hour of planning?
Not at all.
But do you see how we took this monstrous task of design an entire car's touchscreen and broke it down to the point where we're now able to say, oh, we can actually break up into teams and get these screens started. So that is all what engineering is just taking a big problem, gathering as much information as you can, and then pulling apart that information into logical categories, and then breaking those categories down even further. So we're going to take a quick 5-minute break. When you guys get back, I'm going to show you basicdiagrams.net. It is probably going to be similar to some other tool that you have used at some point in your life. We're going to start to do the basic design, and then I'm going to let you guys go. 5-minute break. Be back here at 8:10.
Okay.
All right, I am going to kick us off here only because I want to get you guys out of here as soon as possible. So, what I did is, I'm sorry this is small, and unfortunately draw.io only lets me make it so big while still being able to keep the thing functional. So, what I did, I'm sorry, I called it draw.io. That's the old name for it. The new name for it is diagrams.net. So if you go to diagrams.net, you don't even have to start, you don't even have to create an account. You can just hit this start button right here. And then you'll have a couple file options, I believe. You can just create a new diagram. You don't have to do this yet. But if you want to just follow along and kind of understand the tool as I'm doing it, that's completely fine. Tomorrow we'll get into the group project dynamics, breaking it apart, figuring out how you're working. But for right now, I just want to get us started on that project overview, right? Of what are those persistent things? How are we going to break up the screen? How is that going to work? So I am going to jump into this blank car interface file that I already have started, and I'm going to drag out our main rectangle, right? And I'm going to just drag that out to look like it is kind of car-sized, right? So that's probably a little too wide. Now, of course, you could come over here and use these project properties to enter the exact number of the screen. But for right now, I'm just going to say that looks roughly touchscreen size to me, right? It's roughly the right aspect ratio. So I'm going to switch over to our car requirements. I'm going to come down to our persistent status, and I'm going to say, all right, we need current speed, the sensor information, a navbar dock, the car charge status, time and temperature, car maintenance, music volume, and temperature. So this to me is going to be our starting point. That navbar dock is what's controlling what app is on the screen, and it's always going to show up. So I'm going to model this right after the dock on the Mac, right? That little thing down at the bottom. So I'm going to take another rectangle out here, and I'm going to drag this across, and I'm going to say, hey, this is going to be our navbar. And in our navbar, we've already written out a couple things that we need. So I'm going to drag out some text here, and I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to use an emoji, which you can trigger by hitting Command Control Space on your keyboard. And I'm just going to grab the music icon, and then right under that, I'm going to say music. And because I want that to look like a button, I may come in here to the style and throw a line around it and just drag that up so it looks like a little icon. And we've got our nav bar started already. All right, what else did we say we need? We are going to go back to our planning doc, and we said current speed. That's not really an app, right? That's not going to go in. Time and temperature we could put in there. Music volume, that we probably need. And temperature we probably need. So let's start with that. So we're going to come in here, and I'm going to find a left arrow, and I'm going to put that in. And then I'm going to say, grab a speaker from the emoji and put that in. And then I'm going to grab my right arrow and put that in. And now we've got our little
I'm
speaker.
so sorry, Max. My apologies. Quick question.
Yep.
Just random, but I'm not seeing where you're getting it from. Where are you getting these emojis from?
It may not be showing up in my screen share. If you hit Control, Alt, and Space, I'm sorry,
Yep.
Command, Control, and Space on your Mac, it
Command,
should bring
Control.
up a little emoji picker.
Oh.
And you can type in left arrow or you know, speaker or music or whatever you want in there. And it should show you all the emojis that match. And then if you click on that emoji, it will insert it into whatever you're working on.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. From there, we said we also need temperature control. So I'm going to grab this again, drop this in here, and maybe let's put that over here because that's probably what's going to get adjusted most by the driver, right? And so I'm going to come in here, and this, I'm going to actually use a little minus. And then we're going to say, let's make it 70 degrees. And I can even come into that emoji picker and get the little degree sign. And then I'm going to add my little plus. And now we've got a little temperature thing going on. And if we go back, we said temperature, but if we look, we also need temperature for both the passenger and the driver. So we're going to just take that whole thing, copy it, slide it over, and now we've got our passenger temperature over on the right side of the screen where the passenger sits, and we've got our driver temperature over on the left side of the screen where the driver sits. Okay. We got radio music going on already. We added that. We added our music volume. We still have all of this stuff to go, but what else needs to be in our nav bar and our dock? Well, we already got music. We already got climate control. We probably need one for our GPS, right? So we're going to come in, and I'm going to just take this one, put it over here. Let's maybe give it some space. And we're going to say, can I get a little, ooh, I can get a little satellite. That's perfect. And we'll call that GPS. Okay. Back to my list. Controls we need to add. Persistent status, there's still more things in here. But music, we have added. Climate control, we have added. GPS, we have added. And then the rest of these aren't MVP, so we're not going to worry about them, right? So last thing I need to do is add in a little controls button. And let's say because that's controlling the car, we're going to use a little car icon. Now I'm being persnickety. Let's use the little race car. And we'll say controls. And now that we've got all of that in there, I'm just going to zoom out a little bit so we can see everything. To zoom, if you use the Option key, you can use the trackpad to scroll up or down, or you can control the zoom from right up here. So now I'm just going to space that out a little bit. If you click on an item, you can hold in Command, click on another item, and keep on clicking on them to select multiples. And then I'm just going to kind of try and center that a little bit. And I think that looks pretty good. Questions as to how I got that far?
I got a question.
Shoot.
When I was trying to make a second box, they wouldn't overlap.
Um,
I couldn't get.
So you should be able to just drag the box out, the rectangle. Is that what you couldn't do?
don't know. It was transparent. I don't know.
So tomorrow, as we start working with this tool, if you get stuck somewhere or you're like, I just wanted to do this one little thing, we'll go around and share your screen, and I'll be able to help you get unstuck. Or Karen will also be able to help you if you can't get something to work the way you think it should. Okay, so now that we've got all of that done, I think it's safe to actually do proper project management and cross this off the list. Okay, so we need persistent status, but when we think about it, we also need some area of the screen to show part of whatever app is open, right? And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to split the screen up, and we're going to say, hey, this portion of the screen is always going to be for the persistent car information. And whatever is over here, that's always going to be for whatever app is selected, whether it's controls, GPS, or music. So when we look at our persistent data information, I just pulled that list out to another screen so I can see it. We need our current speed. So let's think about where a driver is sitting. The driver's sitting over here, right, on the left side. And what's the easiest thing for them going to be able to see? Probably that like top left corner, right? So that's where we're going to put the speed. So I'm going to come out here and I'm going to say that they're driving 70 miles per hour. But a wireframe is supposed to have some idea of size, right? We need to know an idea of how big that speed is. And that 70 is going to look really tiny to me as a driver. So I don't actually care about the MPH as much. I really only care about that speed. So that's what I'm going to come in and I'm going to make much bigger. And I'm going to say, hey, we're currently going 70 miles an hour. And I just did that by selecting the text, coming over here to the right, and adjusting that size. All right, current speed we've got. Now some sensor information we need to show up. So why don't we drag out, just looking at my shape types here, why don't we drag out a little box here, and we can grab a warning icon. And I'm going to take the line off of that so it just shows up there. Drag that over a little bit. And then we can drag a little text thing here. Probably doesn't need to be that big. So let's break it down to, I don't know, maybe 36. A little smaller. Let's go 24. And we will say something like, warning, check tire pressure. And we can come in here and just grab that box. And we want to make sure that we're on this blue handle and not on that little arrow that shows up. That little arrow is actually to connect lines to other shapes, which we don't want to do at this point. So we're going to grab that. We'll drag that out a little bit bigger. And we'll drag that down there. Can make that bigger so we can center it on
Max,
the
can we
shape.
get rid of the word? Can we get rid of the word warning since the symbol kind of implies that?
Sure can. Okay. I think that's a good persistent thing, and we could just hide that if we didn't need that information. Okay. Car should show charge status. So let's just take our 70 mile an hour thing, bring it over here, and say that it's charged to 50%. And it probably doesn't need to be that big, so I'm going to just pull that down to 12. No, I'm not. Let's put that down maybe to 16. And then 50% may not be obvious, so let's just grab a little icon for the battery and drop that in there. Move that over to the
Max,
top.
With that, we include like a range of what 50% of the battery would get you?
Sure. So we could easily add that in right underneath it, and we could say, 200 miles. And let's right justify that. Looks pretty good to me. So let's go back to our list. We've got current speed. We added that in. Sensor information. We added that in. And this is, you know, we could put in any sensor information there, right? We could easily replace this with, instead of check tire pressure, we could make that, you know, say some other message down there if we needed it to. Okay. Car status, the charge status, we did that. So cross that off. Time and temperature, that's a good one. Now, we could keep on putting more information in here, or what if we use this top part and display some information that will always be sitting on top of the app, right? And so the best way to think about that is think about the top bar on your Mac, right? Where the Apple's in the top left and you always have the application name, file, edit, all of those. Let's start using some of our screen real estate that we have here. So I'm going to grab out some text and I'm just going to say that it is 70 degrees outside, and let's make it a true Syracuse temperature and drop it down a little bit. And we want to make sure our fonts are almost matching. So we've got 16 here. Let's make sure that we've got 16 going on here so it looks consistent. We've got our temperature added there, and we said we also needed our time. So we will move that over maybe a little bit, copy and paste it, and say it is going to be 8:26 p.m. It's type 9, but that's okay. Move that over so there's a little breathing room. Making good progress. This is feeling like a car screen to me. Okay, car maintenance and issue reporting. We added that in, so we can cross both of those off. Music volume. We actually already have added right here in our doc. So we already completed that. And temperature, we also already completed. So now we are able to go in and say, hey, what's this music app going to look like? What's the GPS and the controls app going to look like? And what is, there was a fourth one. What is the climate control going to look like? So you'll be able to get to climate by just tapping on one of these buttons, either on this side or on this side, and it's going to pop open the climate app here. Okay.
That's what about the compass that I think that was suggested? So like the direction that you're traveling in.
Yeah, so that's a design choice of, hey, do I want the compass to always show up, at which point we could just shove it up here or maybe over here in this side? Or do we want that to only show up when you're in GPS? And I will leave that up to whoever the GPS group is to decide whether they would like that in their app or would like to add that to the persistent display somewhere. Okay, that is all I have for you guys. Homework is pretty light. There's one reading assignment for you. I won't make it a second assignment, but get into draw.io. Play with some shapes tonight. Try and get things lining up. If you would like to try and remake this, you are totally welcome to. But starting in tomorrow's class, we'll break up into groups and start working on what this looks like and doing all of those sub apps in there. I will hang around if anyone has any questions. Otherwise, you guys are free to go and done for the night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And give the box around it.
Synchronize our stand. Thank you. Yeah, we just never ready. I'm like, damn, but my brain don't work if I.
Don't forget to do your feedback surveys.
Where are they?
They're
Under the Canvas.
Yep, on
Okay.
Canvas, you should be able to get them.
Yep.
They're really important because it helps Max decide what is working and what isn't working with you guys in learning, and if anything needs to be changed for the next cohort coming up.
Yeah, and to add to that, we read the feedback surveys nightly. So if there's something in class where you're like, oh my God, it drives me nuts when he does this one particular thing, like throw that in the feedback survey. And the surveys you can just be anonymous in, right? If you don't type in your name, that's completely fine. So, definitely fill them out. I read them nightly, and that not only will influence future cohorts, but may also influence what we do the next day. So yes, thank you, Karen, for bringing that up. The link is in Canvas under the general resources section.